The palace did not know Clara Whitmore's name loudly enough to honor her, but it knew how to call for her before dawn. It called in the quiet places first. A silver bell outside the healing wing. A nervous knock from the lower kitchen. A folded message pushed beneath her door by a young guard who had been told never to disturb the Alpha King before sunrise. Clara woke before the third sound. She always did. For 3 years, her body had learned the rhythm of Blackwell Palace better than it had learned rest. She knew which corridor tiles stayed cold even in summer. She knew which servants lied about being well because they feared dismissal. She knew which council reports Rowan would pretend to have read and which border maps needed to be placed on his left side because old war wounds made turning his neck painful in the morning. No one had taught her those things. No one had thanked her for remembering. Still, Clara rose. The room in the east wing was small, narrow, and too far from the royal chambers to be mistaken for honor. Its single window faced the inner courtyard, where moonlight still clung to the stone fountain. A plain wardrobe stood against one wall, a writing desk against another. On the desk lay 3 unfinished lists. Medical supplies for the Southern Patrol. Revised kitchen schedule for the visiting Alpha delegation. Rowan's private council notes, rewritten in cleaner order because the original pages had been scattered, angry, and impossible. Clara looked at the lists for a moment. Then she folded them neatly. Work first, feelings later. That had become the quiet law of her life. She washed her face in cold water, pinned back her soft brown hair, and dressed in a modest cream gown that made her look gentler than she felt. Her reflection stared back from the small mirror. Pale skin, round cheeks, tired eyes that still tried to look kind. A cute face, one maid had once whispered. A harmless face. Clara had learned that people mistook softness for permission. She took Rowan's black ceremonial cloak from the chair, where she had mended it past midnight. The silver clasp had been cracked from his last council outburst. He had thrown it onto a table, forgotten it, and expected it repaired by morning. Of course it was. Clara carried the cloak through the east wing, down the servant stairs, and into the waking belly of the palace. The lower kitchen was already in panic. Lady Clara, a young maid whispered, though Clara had no title that made the word legal. The honeyed mint is gone. His Majesty's tea. Use winter balm and 1 leaf of crushed lavender, Clara said, tying the kettle cloth herself. Not 2. 2 makes it bitter. The maid nodded as if Clara had just saved a treaty. Perhaps she had. Rowan Blackwell ruled armies, borders, and ancient wolf bloodlines. But one wrong tea before council could turn his temper into whether the entire palace had to survive. Next came the healing wing. A warrior from the night patrol sat on a bench with a bandaged arm and bloodless lips. The healer was searching the wrong cabinet. Second shelf, Clara said softly. Blue jar. Not green. The green slows fever, not bleeding. The healer looked relieved. The warrior tried to stand. Clara stopped him with a look. Sit. He sat. People obeyed Clara in emergencies, then forgot she existed when the room became beautiful again. By the time the first light touched the palace windows, she had corrected the council maps, soothed 2 frightened omegas, sent fresh broth to the southern guards, and placed Rowan's cloak over the high-back chair in his private chamber. The room smelled of cedar smoke and power. Rowan had not entered yet. His crown ring rested on the desk, beside a stack of unsigned border decrees. Clara arranged them in the order he preferred, but never admitted needing. War reports first. Trade disputes second. Family petitions last, because he hated reading anything that asked him to be gentle. She poured the tea. Steam rose in a thin silver line. Then she paused. On the far side of the desk lay an invitation sealed with black wax. Tonight's council feast. The visiting alphas. The treaty signing. Clara had prepared the seating chart herself. Her name was not on it. Of course it was not. Still, for one foolish heartbeat, she had looked. That was the humiliating part. Not being excluded. Expecting otherwise. The door opened behind her. Rowan Blackwell entered with the cold command of a man the world had always moved aside for. Tall, dark-haired, sharp-featured, beautiful in the cruel way winter mountains were beautiful. His gray eyes moved over the desk, the cloak, the tea, the documents. Everything ready. Everything smooth. His gaze reached Clara last. Good, he said. One word. Not thank you. Not good morning. Just good. As if she were part of the room, functioning correctly. Clara lowered her eyes because habit was sometimes stronger than pride. Your council begins in 20 minutes. I know. He did not. She had reminded him twice yesterday. Rowan took the cup and drank. His shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. Clara saw it because she saw everything no one else bothered to notice. For a moment, the old ache moved through her. The dangerous one. The one that remembered winter nights, softer voices, a cloak placed over her shoulders 3 years ago when she had still believed patience could become belonging. Rowan turned toward the window. The feast tonight must be perfect. It will be. He did not ask how she knew. He never did. Outside, the palace bells began to ring. Blackwell Palace woke fully then. Servants crossing corridors, guards changing posts, elders gathering their papers, visiting banners unfurling beneath a pale morning sky. Everyone moving. Everyone needing. Everyone calling for pieces of Clara without ever asking whether Clara had somewhere to stand when the music began. She picked up the empty tray. At the door, Rowan spoke again. Clara. Her hand stilled on the latch. Yes, Your Majesty. A pause. You will make sure the East Corridor remains clear tonight. The delegates should not see disorganization. The East Corridor. The servant passage behind the feast hall. The place where people waited when they were useful, but not welcome. Clara's fingers tightened once around the tray, then relaxed. Of course. She left before he could see her face. In the hallway, the palace called her name again. A guard needed medicine. A maid needed instructions. An elder needed a missing treaty page. Clara answered each one. Calmly. Efficiently. Softly. And by sunset, the entire palace would shine because of her hands. The chandeliers would glow. The treaty table would gleam. Rowan's cloak would fall perfectly across his shoulders. The visiting alphas would praise. By noon, half the palace had already passed through Clara Whitmore's hands. Not officially. Never officially. Officially, the palace belonged to Alpha King Rowan Blackwell, to his council, to the old bloodline portraits staring coldly from the northern gallery. Officially, Clara was only a companion of uncertain rank, a woman kept close enough to be useful and far enough away to be easily ignored. But unofficially, the palace looked for her whenever something began to crack. A kitchen boy burned his hand on a copper pot. Clara wrapped it before the healer arrived. A young Omega spilled wine on a treaty cloth and began trembling as if the stain were a death sentence. Clara turned the cloth, covered the mark with a silver runner, and told her to breathe. One of the visiting Alpha's guards demanded a room change near the royal wing. The steward panicked. Clara moved 3 assignments, changed 2 meal routes, and prevented a border insult before anyone important learned there had been one. The palace survived because Clara noticed small things. Rowan survived because she noticed dangerous ones. She knew when his silence meant calculation and when it meant pain. She knew when to send away councilmen before their questions struck the wrong nerve. She knew which reports would make him colder and which names would soften him for half a second. Once, she had mistaken that knowledge for intimacy. Now she was not sure what it was. Service, perhaps. Training. A slow kind of disappearance. In the healing wing, a boy named Miles sat on the edge of a cot, one boot in his hand and one foot wrapped badly in linen. Who did this? Clara asked. Miles looked guilty. Me. That is clear. His ears reddened. She knelt before him and unwound the bandage with careful hands. The cut was not deep, but it needed cleaning. He hissed when the medicine touched. Sorry, Clara said. No, Lady Clara. Again, that title. Softly given. Quietly illegal. They said you would know what to do, Miles muttered. Who did? Everyone. Clara paused. Only for a breath. Then she continued wrapping the wound. Everyone. Everyone knew to send their fear, mistakes, wounds, and hunger to her. But when the council doors opened, she became air. When seats were counted, she became absent. When Rowan stood beneath banners and accepted praise for a stable palace, no one mentioned the woman who had spent 3 years keeping stability from bleeding through the walls. Miles looked toward the hallway. Are you going to the feast tonight? No, his brows pulled together. But you prepared it. Clara tied the bandage neatly. That does not mean I belong at it. The words left her too easily. That frightened her more than sadness would have. Miles opened his mouth, but she stood before he could answer. Keep weight off that foot until morning. If you ignore me, I will tell Captain Hale you are secretly terrible at following orders. That made him smile. It cost her less to make others smile than to explain why she could not. When she left the healing wing, the palace had shifted into evening preparation. Servants rushed beneath garlands of winter ivy. Musicians tuned strings in the west alcove. The feast hall doors stood open, revealing polished floors, gold plates, and the long table where visiting alphas would sit beside Rowan. Clara stopped just outside the threshold. The hall was beautiful, painfully so. Every candle was placed exactly as she had ordered. Every banner hung at the proper height. The treaty table waited beneath the largest chandelier, blackwood shining like still water. At Rowan's right side stood the empty chair, high-backed, carved silver, reserved for someone important enough to be seen beside him. Clara had left it empty because no one had told her whose name to place there. For one quiet second, foolish hope rose again. Thin, embarrassing, alive despite years of neglect. Perhaps Rowan had left the chair unnamed because he intended to decide at the feast. Perhaps he remembered the winter promise. Perhaps tonight, before the allied alphas, he would finally stop hiding her in useful corridors and let the palace know what she was to him. She hated herself a little for thinking it. Then she hated the palace more for teaching her to survive on possibilities instead of truth. Clara. She turned. Rowan stood behind her in the black ceremonial cloak she had repaired. It fell perfectly from his shoulders. The silver clasp caught the light without showing the crack she had mended through the night. He looked like a king no one could touch. She knew exactly where the seam had almost broken. His gaze followed hers to the empty chair, then returned to her face. The seating chart is correct? Yes. Good. Again. That word. Small enough to starve on. Clara folded her hands. Would you like a name placed beside you? Something moved across his expression. Not surprise. Not warmth. Irritation, perhaps, at being asked to define what he preferred kept vague. No, he said. Leave it empty. Clara felt the answer settle where hope had been. Of course. Rowan adjusted one glove. You will remain near the east corridor during the feast. If anything is needed, I expect you to handle it quickly. Near. Not inside. Available. Not present. Useful. Not honored. Clara lowered her head before her face could betray the wound. Yes, Your Majesty. He studied her for a moment. Perhaps he noticed something. Perhaps he nearly asked. Then one of the elders called for him from the hall, and Rowan turned away. Just like that. The conversation ended because the king had been needed elsewhere. Clara watched him enter the feast hall. The elders straightened. The guard saluted. The visiting alphas rose. Power recognized power. No one looked back at the woman standing outside the doors. Clara remained there until a servant brushed past carrying wine and whispered, "Excuse me, Lady Clara." The girl sounded afraid of interrupting her thoughts. Clara almost laughed. Instead, she stepped aside. The feast began as bells rang overhead. Music filled the hall. Laughter followed. Clara took her place in the east corridor with a tray of spare documents, medicines, and emergency keys hidden beneath a folded cloth. Prepared for everything. Invited to nothing. From where she stood, she could see Rowan at the head of the table. The empty chair beside him gleamed in candlelight. Not for her. Not for anyone. A symbol, perhaps, of the place she had mistaken for waiting. Clara looked at it until the image stopped hurting sharply and began hurting quietly. That was how most things ended inside her. Not with a break. With a slow lowering of expectation until the heart learned to make less noise. 3 years earlier, Rowan Blackwell had made Clara Whitmore believe the palace could become gentle. That was the cruelest part. Not the coldness. Not the empty chair. Not the way everyone called for her when something broke and forgot her when the chandeliers were lit. The cruelest part was that Rowan had not always been this distant. Once, during the first winter Clara spent in Blackwell Palace, the old northern windows had frozen from the inside. Snow pressed against the glass like a white hand. The council had argued for 6 hours over border taxes, wolf patrol routes, and whether the eastern families deserved grain after failing to send soldiers. Clara had been 24 then. Softer. Hopeful in the embarrassing way people become when they have not yet learned how long neglect can wear a kind face. She had stood near the back of the council chamber with ink on her fingers and a stack of revised petitions in her arms. No one had asked her to stay. No one had asked her to leave. She had simply become useful enough to remain unnoticed. The room had been bitterly cold. Not because the fire was weak. Because Rowan was angry. His temper changed the air even when he did not raise his voice. Elders grew smaller in their chairs. Guards stopped shifting their weight. Servants moved like ghosts, terrified of drawing breath too loudly. A southern elder had dismissed an Omega petition with a careless wave. "They always complain when winter comes," he said. "Give them half rations. Hunger teaches loyalty." No one corrected him. Clara remembered that most clearly. Not the cruelty, the silence around it. She had stepped forward before fear could stop her. "Half rations will cost more lives than grain," she said. The chamber turned. Every eye found her at once. She should have apologized. That was what her rank required. Instead, she held the petition tighter and added, "The lower families worked the outer fields until frostbite took their hands. Punishing them now will weaken the pack before spring." The southern elder's face darkened. "And who gave you permission to speak?" No one answered. Clara felt the cold then. Real cold. The kind that reaches bone when courage has nowhere to hide. Then Rowan looked up from the head of the table. "I did." He had not. Everyone knew he had not. But no one challenged the Alpha King. The elder lowered his gaze. Rowan held out one hand. "Bring me the petition." Clara walked forward, knees steady only because she refused to give the room the pleasure of seeing them shake. She placed the papers before him. Their fingers did not touch. Still, her heart behaved as if they had. Rowan read the first page, then the second. Then he signed the order for full winter rations and added guards to escort the grain carts himself. When the council dismissed, Clara stayed behind to gather the discarded drafts. Her hands shook then, after danger had passed. They always did afterward. She had been collecting ink bottles when a weight settled over her shoulders. Blackwell. Warm. Rowan's cloak. Clara turned sharply. He stood beside her. No crown, no council mask. Only a man in a dim chamber with firelight cutting shadows across his face. "You were cold," he said. She should have thanked him politely. She should have removed the cloak and returned it at once. Instead, she held the edges closed with both hands because warmth was dangerous when given to someone who had been standing alone too long. "I spoke out of turn," she said. "Yes." Her face heated. Then Rowan added, "Do it again when they are wrong." Clara looked at him. There had been something in his eyes then. Not softness exactly. Rowan had never been soft. But attention, recognition, a kind of restrained wonder, as if he had looked at the useful girl in the corner and found a person there. "You noticed what they did not," he said. "They noticed," Clara replied quietly. "They chose not to care." For 1 second, silence held between them. Then Rowan's mouth curved slightly. "Barely, but enough. Careful, Clara Whitmore. You will make this palace honest." The words should have meant nothing. Kings said things in passing. Powerful men gave warmth the way winter gave sunlight. Briefly, beautifully, without promise. But Clara had been young enough to keep it. Later, near the stairwell, when he walked her back toward the east wing himself, the old corridor lamps flickering around them, he had said the sentence that ruined her better judgment for years. One day, Rowan told her, voice low enough that only she could hear, "This palace will know what you are to me." Clara had believed him, not because he promised loudly, because he had said it quietly. Quiet promises were easier to mistake for sacred ones. That night, she folded the memory carefully inside herself. Every time the council ignored her, she touched it. Every time a servant asked whether she was Rowan's charity or inconvenience, she returned to it. Every time she watched another noblewoman sit closer to the king than she was allowed to stand, she told herself one day had simply not arrived yet. One day, one day, one day, the softest chain in the palace. Now, standing in the east corridor outside the treaty feast, Clara listened to laughter pour through the half-open doors and understood how long a woman could survive on 2 words. The visiting alphas toasted Rowan's strength. The elders praised Blackwell order. Someone complimented the flawless seating, the perfect wine, the treaty maps arranged by border priority. Rowan accepted it all from the head of the table. The empty chair beside him remained untouched. Clara stood with medicines, keys, and spare documents beneath a folded cloth. No cloak over her shoulders now. No quiet promise warming her hands. Only the echo of a winter night that had once made neglect feel temporary. A young maid hurried to her side. "Lady Clara," she whispered, breathless. "The Eastern Alpha wants the amended border copy." Clara reached beneath the cloth and handed it over without looking. Second seal. Not the first. The first draft insults his river claim. The maid blinked. How did you know? Because Clara knew everything. Because Clara had made the palace survivable. Because Clara had spent 3 years becoming necessary to a man who still did not think necessity deserved a chair. Go, Clara said softly. The maid ran. Inside the hall, laughter rose again. This time, Rowan laughed too. Low. Rare. Clara's chest tightened before she could stop it. She turned slightly, enough to see through the narrow opening. Rowan sat in candlelight, black cloak perfect on his shoulders, silver clasp shining where her needle had repaired it. His expression was relaxed in the way it almost never was with her anymore. One visiting alpha leaned toward him, smiling over a cup of wine. The empty chair between Rowan and the rest of the table looked deliberate now. Not waiting. Protecting absence. Clara looked away. Her fingers found the small silver hairpin at her collar, the one Rowan had given her after that winter council. Not formally. Not publicly. He had left it on her desk the next morning with no note, no explanation, just a piece of silver shaped like a crescent moon. For years, she had worn it hidden under fabric. A private proof. Now it felt less like proof and more like evidence against her own heart. The feast continued. Voices grew warmer. Wine loosened tongues. Clara remained outside, where useful women belonged when powerful men celebrated the order they had not built alone. Then she heard her name. Not called. Spoken. From inside the hall. A visiting alpha's voice, amused and careless. What of the soft little shadow in your corridor, Blackwell? The one who knows where everything is before your stewards do. The laughter that followed was light. Friendly. Dangerous. Clara went still. The maid beside her stopped breathing. Inside, someone chuckled. Another voice said, "Ah yes. The pale one. Pretty enough in a quiet way. Always nearby." Clara's hand tightened around the tray. She waited for Rowan to correct them. Not fiercely. Not even kindly. Only enough. A word. A line. A small wall between her dignity and their amusement. The hall settled. Then Rowan's voice reached the corridor. Cold. Careless. Perfectly clear. Clara is useful. Silence did not follow. Laughter did. And Clara Whitmore finally understood that some promises did not break all at once. Some simply aged into insults while you were still wearing the memory like a jewel beneath your collar. Clara Whitmore did not move after Rowan called her useful. That was the first mercy she gave herself. She did not gasp, did not drop the tray, did not step backward into the wall like a wounded girl in a corridor story servants would whisper about by morning. She simply stood there, one hand resting on the folded cloth, the silver hairpin hidden beneath her collar suddenly colder than the stones beneath her feet. Inside the feast hall, laughter loosened around her name. Not cruel enough to be called attack. That made it worse. Cruelty, when obvious, could be defended against. Careless amusement slipped under the ribs because everyone involved could later pretend it had been harmless. She is useful, one visiting alpha repeated, amused. That sounds very royal of you, Blackwell. Another voice joined, older, rougher from wine. Every palace needs one. A quiet woman who knows when to appear and when to disappear. More laughter. Clara felt the young maid beside her turn pale. Lady Clara. The girl whispered, barely sound at all. Clara lifted one finger. Not now. The maid went silent. Inside, a glass touched wood. Then the first alpha spoke again. But tell me, does she know that? Or does the little shadow imagine herself more? A pause followed. Small. Sharp. The kind of pause where a decent man could place a boundary. Clara waited inside it. She hated that she waited. Even now. Even after useful. Even after laughter. A part of her still reached toward the winter corridor, toward the black cloak on her shoulders, toward Rowan's low voice telling her one day. The pause ended. Rowan said, Clara understands her place. The words did not break her loudly. They did something colder. They removed the last warm room inside her and left the door open to winter. The feast hall responded with approval. A few chuckles. Someone murmured, good. Loyal women are easier to manage when they know where the line is. This time, Rowan did not correct him. Clara looked down at her hands. They were steady. That seemed strange. The tray was still balanced. The emergency keys still lay hidden beneath the folded cloth. The amended treaty copy still waited where she had placed it in case Rowan needed another small disaster prevented. The palace had trained her well. Even humiliation could not make her inefficient. The young maid's eyes filled with tears. Clara noticed and felt an unexpected tenderness. Not for herself. For the girl who had just learned how power sounded when it thought the corridor was empty. "Take the west stair," Clara whispered. "Tell the kitchen to hold the second course 10 minutes. The Northern Alpha drinks too fast when meat is served early." The maid stared at her. "But go." The girl obeyed because everyone obeyed Clara when something might fall apart. Clara remained alone in the east corridor. Inside, Rowan's voice shifted back to treaties, borders, trade routes, military access. Calm, commanding, untouched by the sentence he had just placed on her life. She listened for a few more breaths. Not because she wanted to suffer, because she needed to know if there would be regret in his tone. A stumble, a silence, a belated correction. There was none. Only the smooth continuation of a king who had used her truth as entertainment and moved on before the wound finished opening. Clara touched the silver hairpin beneath her collar. The crescent edge pressed against her fingertip. For years, she had treated it like proof that Rowan remembered her privately. Now she understood privacy had been the problem. Private kindness did not protect a woman from public shame. Private promises did not make a home. Private recognition, when hidden too long, became another way of asking her to disappear. The feast hall doors stood half open. Warmth spilled through the gap. So did music. So did Rowan's laughter, lower this time, rare and relaxed. Clara looked toward the empty chair beside him. She could see only part of it from the corridor. The silver-carved back, the polished arm, the untouched goblet in front of it. For 3 years, that chair had lived somewhere in her imagination. A place waiting, a future delayed, a silent apology for every time she stood behind the room instead of inside it. Now it looked exactly like what it was. Furniture, nothing more. The Eastern Alpha's voice rose again. "Your palace runs beautifully, Blackwell." Rowan answered, "It is expected to." Expected. Not built. Not cared for. Not held together with sleepless nights and careful hands. Expected. Clara inhaled slowly. The breath hurt less than she thought it would. That frightened her for a moment. Then she understood. There are sentences that wound the heart. And there are sentences that kill the hope, keeping the wound alive. She is useful. Clara understands her place. Loyal women are easier to manage. 3 knives. Clean. Enough. The silver bell from the lower kitchen rang softly at the end of the corridor, asking for her again. A normal sound. A palace sound. A sound from a life that expected her to continue. Clara did not answer it. For the first time in 3 years, the palace called and Clara let the sound die without moving. Inside the feast hall, Rowan lifted his cup. "To order," he said. "To Blackwell order," someone echoed. Glasses rang. Clara stepped away from the half-open doors. Not quickly, not dramatically. One quiet step, then another. The tray remained in her hands until she reached the small alcove near the service stairs. There, she placed it on a stone ledge with the same care she gave everything that had never loved her back. The keys, the medicines, the spare documents, all of it, waiting for someone else to learn how much invisible labor weighed. She removed the silver hairpin from beneath her collar. For a moment, it lay in her palm, delicate and cold. A crescent moon, a private gift, a private chain. Clara closed her fingers around it. Not yet, she thought. She would not leave it here. Not in a corridor. Not where some servant might find it and turn it into pity. Some endings deserve to be placed where the person who caused them had no choice but to see. The feast continued behind her. The palace lights glowed. Music softened the edges of insult. No one came looking. That was fitting. Clara walked toward the east wing with the hairpin in her hand and Rowan's laughter still echoing behind her. By the time she reached the shadowed stairs, something inside her had gone completely quiet. Not healed, not numb. Decided. She had spent 3 years waiting for the palace to learn what she was to him. Tonight, Rowan had taught her what she was to the palace. Useful, manageable, outside the room. And Clara Whitmore finally stopped mistaking a place that needed her for a place that wanted her home. Clara Whitmore entered the feast hall while Rowan Blackwell was still smiling. That was how the room learned something had changed. Not because she slammed the doors. She did not. Not because she raised her voice. She never had. The doors were already half open. Clara simply crossed the threshold with Rowan's repaired black cloak folded over both arms, the silver hairpin hidden in her closed hand, and a calmness so complete it made the nearest servant step back without knowing why. The music faltered first. Only one violin. Then another. The sound thinned until the great hall began to notice its own silence. At the head of the table, Rowan turned. For a moment, he looked irritated. Not guilty. Not startled. Only displeased that the corridor had entered the room. Clara, he said. Her name carried across polished wood, golden plates, crystal glasses, and the empty chair beside him. That chair still waited in candlelight. Not for her. Never for her. Clara walked toward it. Every visiting alpha watched. Some recognized her from the corridor. Some smiled faintly, expecting embarrassment, apology. A soft woman called forward because she had misunderstood her place. The Eastern alpha leaned back with amused interest. Well, he murmured, loud enough for several men to hear. The little shadow appears. Rowan's eyes sharpened. Not at the insult. At the volume. Clara heard both truths. She stopped beside the empty chair, close enough to Rowan that she could see the silver clasp she had repaired at his throat. The crack was invisible. Her stitches were hidden beneath royal polish. That had been her work for years. Repair the damage. Hide the seam. Let him look untouched. She placed the folded cloak over the back of the empty chair. A small movement. Precise. Final. Rowan looked from the cloak to her face. What are you doing? Clara opened her hand. The silver hairpin lay against her palm, crescent moon catching the candlelight. His expression changed then. Not much. Enough. Recognition crossed his face before he could turn it into command. The room noticed. Good. Let them. Clara set the hairpin on top of the cloak. Not thrown. Not broken. Returned. Like a key to a door she no longer intended to open. You left this on my desk 3 winters ago, she said. The hall went still. Rowan's mouth tightened. This is not the time. No, Clara replied softly. It is exactly the time. One of the elders shifted in his seat. A visiting alpha lifted his wine slowly, pretending he was not listening. Everyone was listening. That was the only reason Clara had entered. Not for spectacle. For accuracy. If they could laugh at her place in public, then she could correct her misunderstanding in the same room. Rowan lowered his voice. Clara. There it was. The warning dressed as intimacy. She had obeyed that tone for 3 years. Tonight, it arrived too late. You said I was useful, she said. The room tightened. Rowan's eyes flicked to the allied alphas. Damage control. Always that first. Clara continued before he could soften the word into something kinder. You said I understood my place. The Eastern alpha's smile faded. The elder beside him looked down into his cup. Rowan stood slowly. Power rose with him by habit. Chairs seemed smaller. Servants froze. Even the flames along the wall leaned toward caution. Clara did not step back. For once, she let his height be only height. His crown only metal. His anger only proof that truth had touched pride. You misunderstood, Rowan said. The lie came smooth. Almost beautiful. Clara looked at him with quiet attention. No, a single word. It cut through the hall better than shouting would have. Rowan's jaw flexed. You heard a private conversation. It was loud enough for the corridor. A murmur passed through the table. Clara turned slightly, letting her gaze move across the men who had laughed. Not accusing. Remembering. That was worse. I have spent 3 years making sure your palace did not embarrass itself in front of men like these, she said. Tonight, I learned the only embarrassment you feared was me believing I belonged inside it. Rowan's face darkened. You are making this difficult. Clara almost smiled. Difficult. Not painful. Not deserved. Difficult. Even now, he named her wound by how inconvenient it was for him. I am making it accurate. Silence. A servant near the wall covered her mouth with one hand. The sound she made was not quite a sob. Clara heard it. So did Rowan. His eyes moved toward the servant sharply. The girl went pale. Clara stepped once, placing herself between Rowan's gaze and the girl without thinking. The hall saw that too. Of course, Clara protected someone else while her own dignity lay open on the table. That had always been the problem. She had been useful because she cared where others only ruled. The Eastern Alpha cleared his throat. Perhaps this matter is better handled outside the feast. Clara looked at him. He stopped speaking. It surprised him, perhaps, that a soft little shadow could have eyes steady enough to close a king's guest mouth. No, she said. You were comfortable laughing here. His cup lowered. Rowan's voice turned colder. Enough. The old command. The palace knew it. Guards straightened. Servants lowered their heads. Elders stopped breathing. Clara felt the familiar instinct rise inside her. Smooth the room, lower her eyes, protect everyone from the storm. She let the instinct pass. Then she looked at Rowan and said the sentence that emptied the hall of warmth. Then I apologize for mistaking usefulness for belonging. No one moved. Even Rowan became still. For 3 years, he had known Clara as the woman who anticipated, corrected, softened, and stayed. He had never met the version of her who could return a gift without shaking. Clara touched the folded cloak once. Not affectionately, to make sure it stayed where she placed it. The cloak is repaired, she said. The clasp will hold through the winter. The treaty copies are beneath the East Corridor cloth. The Northern Alpha should not be served meat before his second glass of wine. The Southern Patrol needs blue salve, not green. The lower kitchen is short on winter bomb. Her voice did not break. The list landed harder than accusation. Because every sentence proved a system. Every detail proved labor. Every calm instruction revealed how much of Rowan's order had been built by hands he allowed others to laugh at. She looked at the empty chair beside him. I have left everything useful where you can find it. Rowan's expression shifted. Only slightly. But Clara saw the first edge of alarm. Useful things could be replaced. Useful women should not sound like they were finished. Clara, he said again, softer now. She did not let that softness touch her. You were right, she said. I understand my place now. The words returned to him, transformed. Not obedience. Verdict. Clara turned. This time, no one stopped her. Not the guards. Not the elders. Not the laughing alphas, whose amusement had curdled into discomfort. She walked down the long hall beneath chandeliers she had ordered cleaned, past tables she had arranged, past servants who looked at her with wet eyes and straight backs. Near the door, Rowan spoke. You will regret making a scene. Clara paused. Only then did she look back. He stood at the head of the table, hand resting near the returned cloak and the silver hairpin, surrounded by power, praise, and a room that no longer felt entirely his. Clara's face remained calm. No, she said. I regret making a home out of one. Then she stepped into the corridor. The feast hall stayed silent behind her. For once, Blackwell Palace did not call her name. Perhaps it had finally understood that the woman who answered everything had just stopped listening. Rowan Blackwell followed Clara Whitmore into the East Corridor because pride moved faster than regret. That was the first truth. He did not come after her because he understood the wound. Not yet. He came because the feast hall had gone silent behind him, because allied alphas had watched a woman return his gift in public, because servants had lifted their eyes, because the empty chair beside him suddenly looked less like authority and more like accusation. Clara. His voice struck the corridor walls. She stopped near the service alcove where she had left the tray earlier. Keys, medicines, spare treaty copies. Everything arranged exactly where someone useful would leave things before becoming unnecessary. She turned slowly. Rowan stood several paces away, his black cloak no longer on his shoulders, the silver clasp absent from his throat. Without it, he looked slightly unfinished. Clara noticed. She hated that she noticed. You should return to the hall, she said. His brows drew together. You do not dismiss me. No, Clara replied. I am reminding you where you are expected. The sentence landed too close to his own cruelty. His expression hardened. Behind him, the feast hall doors remained open. No one came out. No elder, no guard, no visiting alpha willing to stand inside the consequence of laughter. Rowan lowered his voice. You embarrassed yourself. Clara looked at him for one long second. Then she understood. He still thought shame belonged to her. That almost made this easier. No, she said. I embarrassed the sentence. His jaw tightened. You are twisting words spoken in a political room. I repeated them. You heard pieces. I heard enough. The corridor seemed colder than before. Or perhaps Clara had finally stopped warming it with hope. Rowan stepped closer. Clara, you know what this palace is. Men talk. Allies test weakness. I said what was necessary to keep order. There it was. Order. Always order. The clean word men used when they wanted women to bleed quietly. Clara folded her hands in front of her. Was I the weakness? He did not answer quickly enough. That was answer enough. Something flickered in his eyes when he realized it. Do not make this into something it is not. What is it then? His silence stretched. Clara watched him search for a version of the truth that did not make him cruel. He could not find one fast enough. She nodded faintly. Useful, she said. Manageable. Outside the room. Clara. No, the word was calm. The old rhythm broke beneath it. For years, her name in Rowan's mouth had been enough to pause her anger, soften her hurt, return her to duty before she could choose herself. Tonight, it was only sound. Rowan looked at her as if he had reached for a familiar door and found stone. You are emotional. Clara almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was so ordinary. A woman named the wound, and a man called the naming weakness. I am very calm, she said. That is not what I mean. I know what you mean. You mean I should be hurt quietly enough to remain convenient. The corridor went still. A servant at the far end froze with a wine cloth in her hands. Clara saw her and softened her voice, not for Rowan, but for the girl. It is all right. Go. The servant fled. Rowan's eyes followed her. You are turning the palace against me. Clara looked at him with quiet disbelief. I kept the palace from turning against you. That silenced him. For one breath. Only one. Then his pride recovered. You think too highly of your role. There it was. The final kindness leaving the room. Clara felt it not as a stab, but as a door closing properly at last. Her voice lowered. No. I think correctly of it now. She stepped toward the alcove and lifted the emergency key ring from the folded cloth. The keys chimed softly. Rowan's eyes dropped to them. The healing store, she said, placing one key on the ledge. The lower kitchen pantry. Another key. The council archive. Another. The east garden gate. Another. Your private map cabinet. With each key, his face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Because she was not arguing anymore. She was returning access. Returning labor. Returning the invisible permissions that had allowed Blackwell Palace to wake each morning appearing effortless. You do not need to do that, Rowan said. Yes, Clara replied. I do. The last key was smaller than the rest. Brass. Worn smooth from years of use. Her room. She held it for 1 second before placing it beside the others. Rowan stared at it. Alarm finally moved openly across his face. Clara. This time, her name sounded different. Less command. More question. Too late. She turned from the keys and walked toward the east stairs. He followed. Where are you going? To my room. To do what? She stopped at the first step. Remove myself from a misunderstanding. His eyes narrowed. Do not be dramatic. Clara looked back at him. The chandelier light from the feast hall reached only half his face. The rest remained in shadow. How fitting, she thought. For 3 years, she had loved the side of him that appeared in private and excused the side that ruled in public. Tonight, both had spoken. Both had chosen. I am not being dramatic, she said. I am being quiet. You should be relieved. That is the version of me you preferred. His mouth tightened. For the first time, he looked as if he wanted to reach for her. Not lovingly. Possessively. Like a man whose hand moved only when something began slipping off the edge of his control. Clara saw the movement before it happened. Do not. He stopped. One word from her halted what 3 years of service had never been allowed to interrupt. The shock of it passed through his face. She held his gaze. Do not touch me with hands that only reach when pride is threatened. The corridor breathed around them. Rowan's hand lowered. Slowly. The silence after that sentence belonged to her. Clara continued up the stairs. This time, he did not follow immediately. She could feel him behind her anyway. A weight. A presence. A storm deciding whether to become rain. At the turn of the stairs, he spoke again. You will calm down by morning. Clara paused. Not because the words hurt. Because they revealed how little he understood endings. He still believed this was a mood. An injury. A flare of humiliation that sleep, habit, and palace need would soften into obedience. He still thought morning belonged to him. She looked down at him from the stair. By height alone, she stood above the Alpha King for the first time all night. No, she said. By morning, you will begin noticing what I used to prevent. His expression changed. Not enough. Never enough. But some part of him heard the shape of absence before it arrived. Clara turned away. The east wing was darker than the rest of the palace. Fewer lamps. Thinner rugs. Narrower windows. A place built for women who were near power but not named by it. Her room waited at the end of the corridor. Small. Orderly. Temporary for 3 years. She opened the door and stepped inside. For a moment, she simply stood there. The bed was made. The lists on the desk were folded. The wardrobe held modest gowns in soft colors. A shawl hung over the chair. A vase of dried winter flowers sat on the windowsill, brittle but still shaped like something once living. This was not home. It had taken her 3 years to say that without bleeding. Clara closed the door. Not locked. There was no need. Rowan would not enter if it required admitting he had been kept out. She crossed to the desk and lit one small lamp. Then she took out a travel bag from beneath the bed. No tears came. Only movement. Quiet. Precise. She folded 2 gowns. A cloak of her own. A small purse of coins she had saved from allowances never formally named wages. A packet of letters from her mother. The rest she left. The palace could keep the softness it had never protected. On the desk, she placed the silver hairpin's empty ribbon pouch beside the final list she had written that morning. Not a goodbye letter. She would not explain herself to a man who had needed an audience to understand he had wounded her. The list was only practical. Medicines to reorder. Names of servants with sick children. Patrols needing winter boots. The southern pantry lock that stuck in frost. Evidence, perhaps, that she had loved the palace better than it loved her. She placed the palace room key on top of it. Then she looked around once. No sob. No farewell whispered to walls. No final touch on the pillow. Silent departure required discipline. And Clara Whitmore had been trained by years of swallowing pain. Beyond her window, the feast music started again. Weakly. Wrongly. As if the hall were trying to pretend nothing had shifted. Clara picked up her bag. In the mirror, she saw a woman with pale skin, soft cheeks, and tired eyes that no longer looked toward the palace for permission to matter. She blew out the lamp. The room went dark behind her. Before dawn, Blackwell Palace would call for Clara again. This time, no one would answer. Clara Whitmore left Blackwell Palace through the East Garden Gate, while the feast music was still pretending the night had not changed. That was the kindest exit she could give them. No announcement. No accusation shouted beneath chandeliers. No servants forced to choose whether to stop her. No elders required to witness what their silence had earned. Only a quiet door opening into cold air, a small travel bag in her hand, and the brass key left behind on the desk where Rowan would eventually understand that access had been returned. The garden slept beneath thin moonlight. Winter ivy climbed the stone walls in dark lines. Frost silvered the hedges. The fountain at the center of the courtyard had gone still, its surface glazed with a skin of ice. Clara crossed the path slowly, not because she doubted, because every stone knew her feet. She had walked here after council arguments, after healing wing emergencies, after nights when Rowan's temper made the palace breathe shallowly. She had stood beside that frozen fountain once, wearing his black cloak, believing one day this place would say her name with honor. Now the garden said nothing. That was better. A place that could not welcome her should not pretend to mourn her leaving. At the east gate, the old lock resisted. Of course it did. She had written 3 times that the mechanism stuck in frost. No one had repaired it because Clara had always been there to know the trick. She warmed the key with her breath, angled it slightly left, and turned. The lock opened. A small sound. A private freedom. Beyond the gate, the service road curved toward the outer bridge and the forest path. No guard stood there tonight. Clara had moved them herself earlier that afternoon to the northern arch because the visiting alphas preferred dramatic exits after wine. She had arranged her own disappearance without knowing it. The thought almost made her laugh. Almost. She stepped through the gate and closed it behind her without locking it. Let the palace learn. Let someone else find the hinge, the frost, the neglected things that only became important when no quiet woman remained to manage them. The air outside the walls smelled different. Sharper. Less polished. Pine, cold soil, distant rain. Clara adjusted the strap of her bag and began walking. She did not know exactly where she would go. That should have terrified her. Instead, it felt strangely honest. For 3 years, she had known every room where she was needed and not one place where she was wanted without condition. Tonight, uncertainty felt cleaner than belonging built from insult. Behind her, Blackwell Palace glowed above the hill. A beautiful monster. Golden windows. Silver towers. Music leaking faintly through stone. From a distance, no one could see the corridors where useful women became invisible. No one could see the empty East Wing room. No one could see the folded lists waiting beneath a room key. No one could see the chair beside Rowan with his repaired cloak and the crescent hairpin lying on it like a quiet funeral for a promise. Clara kept walking. The first mile hurt. Not in her feet. In the place's habit lived. A sound from the trees made her turn once, instinctively ready to answer a call that had not come. Her body still expected bells, messages, small emergencies, someone whispering, "Lady Clara, please." She realized then how deeply the palace had trained her to respond before she asked whether she should. The second mile felt colder. Mist gathered low over the road. Her simple cloak was warm but thin, not made for leaving a kingdom at night. The bag grew heavy in her hand. Her breath formed pale clouds before her face. She stopped beneath a bare oak and looked back. Blackwell Palace was smaller now, still bright, still standing, still convinced, perhaps, that morning would return everything to place. Rowan would sleep late after the feast, or he would not sleep at all, angry at her display, certain she had embarrassed herself more than him. By dawn, he would ask for his tea. Someone would bring it wrong. He would frown, then ask for the border map. It would not be ready. Then the healing wing would send for salve. The pantry key would be on a stone ledge where no one thought to look. And slowly, room by room, the palace would find the shape of her absence. Clara touched her throat where the silver hairpin had once rested hidden beneath fabric. Her fingers found only skin. For a moment, grief rose. Not for the palace, for the girl who had stayed. She had not been stupid. Clara needed to believe that. The girl who loved a quiet promise had not been weak. She had been lonely. There was a difference. A horse sounded somewhere ahead. Clara went still. Not fear. Caution. A lantern appeared through the mist, swinging gently from a rider's hand. The horse was dark, its steps slow and unthreatening. The rider wore no palace crest. When he drew closer, Clara recognized him. Thomas Vale, an old carriage master who had served Blackwell Palace before Rowan inherited the crown. He had retired last winter after a councilman called him slow in front of half the courtyard. Clara had been the only one who sent him medicine when his hands swelled from cold. He stopped several yards away. Miss Whitmore. Not Lady Clara. Not Little Shadow. Her name, plainly given. Clara held her bag a little tighter. Mr. Vale. His eyes moved to the road behind her, then to the palace, then back to her face. He asked no rude questions. That was why Clara had always liked him. "I thought you might choose the East Road," he said. Her throat tightened. "You knew?" "I knew the feast was tonight. I knew you were not seated. And I know what kind of place a woman leaves when she carries a bag after midnight." The kindness almost hurt worse than insult. Clara looked away. Thomas lowered the lantern slightly. "My sister keeps an inn beyond the old mill. Neutral ground. No pack mark over the door. If you want a room, she will not ask who you are running from." "I am not running." The words came quickly. Thomas nodded. "No. Forgive me. Who you are walking away from." Silence settled. That correction gave her more dignity than the palace had in years. Clara looked toward the dark road ahead. How far? 3 more miles. She was tired enough that the number mattered. Thomas gestured gently toward the empty carriage behind him. "I can take you there. Or ride beside you if you prefer to walk. Or leave the lantern and go. Choice." The word did not appear aloud, but Clara felt it. A small mercy placed in her hands without ceremony. She looked at the carriage, then at the road, then back once more at Blackwell Palace. It still glowed. Still beautiful. Still not home. "I will ride," she said. Thomas climbed down and opened the carriage door, then stepped away so she could enter without being crowded. Clara noticed that too. After tonight, she noticed every kindness that did not demand ownership. She sat inside, placed her bag beside her, and folded her hands over her lap. The carriage smelled of wool blankets and old cedar. A traveling cloak lay on the opposite seat. "For warmth," Thomas said from outside. "Not obligation." Clara closed her eyes. "Not crying. Not quite. Thank you." The carriage began moving. Wheels turned over the frozen road, carrying her farther from the palace with each quiet rotation. At the first bend, Clara looked through the small window. Blackwell Palace was half hidden by trees now. The towers still reached for the moon. The feast music was gone. Maybe because distance had swallowed it. Maybe because the hall had finally stopped pretending. Clara did not wave goodbye. She did not whisper Rowan's name. She did not promise herself she would never hurt again, because lies were not healing simply because they were spoken bravely. She only watched until the last golden window disappeared behind black branches. Then she turned forward. Inside the carriage, the warmth slowly reached her fingers. For the first time in 3 years, no bell rang for her. No knock came. No Alpha King's voice asked her to make order out of his neglect. The silence should have frightened her. Instead, it sat beside her like the first honest companion she had known in years. Clara leaned back against the worn leather seat and let Blackwell Palace fall behind her, not with a dramatic farewell, but with the quiet finality of a woman who had finally understood that leaving a place was not betrayal when the place had never truly made room for her to stay. By morning, Blackwell Palace began failing in ways too small for pride to understand at first. The first mistake was the tea. Rowan Blackwell sat in his private chamber, still wearing the shirt from last night beneath an unfastened formal coat. He had not slept well. Not because of guilt, he told himself. Because the feast had ended poorly. Because Clara had chosen public embarrassment over private understanding. Because allied alphas had left with careful faces and too many unspoken thoughts. A servant placed the tea on his desk. Rowan lifted it, drank once, and stopped. Too bitter. Too sharp. Lavender, but too much. He looked at the cup as if it had insulted him. Who made this? The young servant flinched. The kitchen, Your Majesty. Clara knows the proportion. The words left him before he thought to stop them. The room went still. The servant looked down. Rowan set the cup aside. Send for her. No one moved. That was the second mistake. A pause where obedience should have been. Rowan lifted his eyes. The servant's hands trembled around the tray. Your Majesty, she whispered, Lady Clara is not in the East Wing. Lady Clara. He almost corrected the title. He did not know why the word bothered him now. Then find her. The servant swallowed. We tried. Something cold touched the back of Rowan's neck. Not fear. Irritation first. Fear arrived later, dressed as anger. What do you mean you tried? The door opened before the servant could answer. Captain Hale entered with a healer, 2 stewards, and an elder who looked as though morning had already defeated him. Rowan stood. Why is half my palace in my chamber? The healer spoke first because desperate people forgot rank. The blue salve key is missing from the store cabinet. It is not missing, the steward said quickly. It was found in the east corridor alcove with 4 other keys. The pantry key was there too, another servant added. And the archive key. Captain Hale's jaw tightened. The Southern Patrol returned before dawn. 3 men need treatment. The healer cannot access the winter tincture chest because Clara kept the secondary lock order. Rowan stared at them. Then break the lock. The healer looked horrified. That cabinet contains moonroot glass. If we break it wrong, we ruin half the stock. Rowan's temper rose. A familiar thing. Usually, Clara would step between the anger and everyone else with some quiet correction, some list, some solution already prepared. Clara was not there. The silence left in her place felt strangely loud. Elder Marlowe cleared his throat. There is also the matter of the treaty copies. Rowan turned on him. What matter? The Northern Alpha's copy was amended last night. We do not know which seal was final. It was under the East Corridor cloth, Rowan said sharply. Again, the words came too easily. Everyone looked at him. Not because he knew. Because Clara had told the feast hall where everything was before leaving. A memory returned. Her voice. The treaty copies are beneath the East Corridor cloth. The Northern Alpha should not be served meat before his second glass of wine. The Southern Patrol needs blue salve, not green. A list, not complaint. Inventory of dependents. Rowan's jaw tightened. Retrieve the copies. We did, Marlowe said. There are 3. Read them. We tried. Rowan's eyes narrowed. The elder lowered his gaze. Only Clara marked the disputed river clause. Without her notation, approving the wrong copy risks reopening the eastern border argument. The room became quiet again. This time, no one mistook it for respect. Rowan moved past them into the corridor. The palace was awake now, but wrong. Not visibly collapsing. Worse. Misaligned. Servants whispered in corners. Guards stood at posts without knowing which orders had changed after the feast. A young Omega cried near the lower stairs because Clara had promised to speak to the steward about her brother's kitchen placement, and no one else knew the boy's name. Rowan heard everything. For years, he had believed he heard too much. This morning, he discovered he had heard almost nothing. In the lower kitchen, the cook held 3 jars of herbs and looked close to tears. She always knew which one. The woman said before remembering who stood before her. Forgive me, Your Majesty. Rowan looked at the jars. They looked identical. That angered him. Not the jars. His own ignorance. He left without answering. In the healing wing, Miles sat on a cot with his foot unwrapped, trying to look brave and failing. The Southern Patrol men waited nearby, pale and sweating. The healer had finally opened the cabinet, but not the locked inner chest. Clara wrote the order down somewhere. The healer insisted. She writes everything down. Everything. The word followed Rowan like a ghost. He turned toward the east wing. The corridors grew narrower as he approached her room. Fewer lamps. Thinner rugs. Less polish. He noticed that too late. At Clara's door, he paused. It was closed. Not locked. His hand hovered over the latch for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he entered. The room was clean. Too clean. The bed made. The wardrobe half empty. The desk cleared except for a folded list and a brass key placed carefully on top. No letter. No dramatic farewell. No plea waiting to soften him. Rowan stood very still. The absence in the room was worse than disorder would have been. Disorder meant haste. This meant decision. He picked up the key first. Her room key. Then the list. Medicines to reorder. Servants with sick children. Patrols needing winter boots. Pantry lock sticks in frost. Lower east window leaks during rain. Miles requires blue salve twice daily. No greeting. No accusation. Only the palace, still being cared for after she had stopped belonging to it. Something shifted under Rowan's ribs. Not regret yet. He resisted that word. Regret belonged to men who had done wrong. He had made a political remark in a political room. Clara had overheard. Clara had reacted. That was the story pride offered him. The room refused it. On the chair near the window lay a wool shawl she had left behind. Plain. Soft. Folded once. Rowan remembered seeing it across her shoulders late at night in the archive, in the healing wing, near council doors. He remembered it the way men remember background details after the person who made them meaningful disappears. He set the list down. Where did she go, he asked. No one answered. He turned. Captain Hale stood in the doorway, face grim. The East Garden gate was opened after midnight. Thomas Vale's carriage tracks were found on the outer road. Thomas Vale. The old carriage master Clara had sent medicine to last winter. Of course, even in leaving, she had more loyalty from retired servants than Rowan had from the people paid to praise him. Send riders, Rowan said. Captain Hale hesitated. That hesitation became the first crack in Rowan's certainty. Now, Rowan ordered. Your Majesty, Hale said carefully. If she left willingly, Rowan's eyes turned cold. She belongs to this palace. The sentence entered the room and changed it, not because it was powerful, because it sounded wrong even to him. Captain Hale lowered his gaze, but not before Rowan saw the discomfort there. Not rebellion. Not yet. Judgment. Small. Unwelcome. Earned. Rowan looked back at the empty room. Her key on the desk. Her handwriting on the list. Her absence arranged with more dignity than his feast. In the chair beside him, there was no silver hairpin. No black cloak. Those were still in the feast hall, returned where everyone could see. He understood then that Clara had not left because she was emotional. She had left because she had finished being managed. Outside the east wing window, morning spread across Blackwell Palace, cold and pale. Below, a kitchen bell rang once. Then again, calling for someone who was no longer there. No footsteps answered. Rowan stood in Clara Whitmore's emptied room and listened to his palace forget how to breathe. Rowan Blackwell found the silver hairpin after the palace had already begun blaming him in silence. It was still in the feast hall. The servants had cleared the wine, the plates, the untouched fruit, the folded treaty cloths, and the half-burned candles. They had polished the table until it shone again. They had swept the floor beneath the chairs. They had removed every visible sign that the night before had gone wrong. Every visible sign except one. The empty chair beside the head of the table remained untouched. Rowan's repaired black cloak lay over its back, and on top of the cloak rested the crescent silver hairpin. Small, delicate, brutally patient. Rowan stood at the threshold for a long moment before entering. No counsel followed him. No allied alpha laughed now. No servant hurried to explain what needed fixing. Only the hall waited. Not grandly. Accusingly. He walked to the chair. For years, that seat had meant nothing to him. A political space. A flexible position. An empty symbol he could use or leave and use depending on the room. Now it looked like a place someone had hoped for quietly until hope became shame. Rowan touched the cloak first. The clasp held perfectly. Of course it did. Clara's work always held. That was why he had stopped seeing it. Not because it was small, because it never failed loudly enough to demand his attention. His fingers moved to the silver hairpin. He remembered leaving it on her desk 3 winters ago. No note. No explanation. A private reward for a public courage he had not wanted to name before the council. At the time, he had thought the silence dignified. Now he understood it had been convenient. He had given Clara enough tenderness to keep her close and too little honor to make her safe. The thought moved through him like a blade turned slowly. Behind him, Elder Marlowe entered with the caution of a man walking toward a wounded animal. "Your Majesty." Rowan closed his hand around the hairpin. "Did you know?" Marlowe did not pretend to misunderstand. "Yes." The answer struck harder because it came quickly. Rowan turned. "You knew she was carrying this palace." The elder's face tightened. "Many of us knew she helped." Helped. The word tasted foul. Rowan looked toward the long table, toward the polished chairs, toward the place where the visiting alphas had laughed while Clara stood in the corridor, holding emergency keys and spare documents. "You knew she was never seated." Marlowe lowered his eyes. "You knew they laughed." Silence. "You knew I allowed it." The elder's voice came quietly. "We knew you did not stop it." There was the difference. Small enough for cowards. Large enough for truth. Rowan wanted anger. Anger would have been easier. He could have used it, sharpened it, turned it outward, blamed Marlowe, the visiting alphas, the servants who had given Clara too much importance, Clara herself for leaving in a way that made the palace suffer. But the empty chair gave him nowhere to place blame except where it belonged. On the table near the cloak lay one of the treaty drafts. Someone had finally found the correct copy. Clara's handwriting marked the margin in small, precise lines. "Do not mention the river first. Let the Eastern Alpha bring it up. He needs to feel he won the concession." Rowan stared at the note. She had even understood the pride of men who mocked her. That was the horror of it. She had protected rooms that did not protect her. Marlowe cleared his throat. Riders followed Thomas Vale's carriage tracks to the old mill road. Rowan's head lifted. And they stopped at the neutral inn. A breath entered Rowan's chest too sharply. "Prepare my horse." Marlowe hesitated. "Your Majesty, the inn is neutral ground." "I know what neutral ground is." She left willingly. Rowan's hand tightened around the hairpin. The silver edge pressed into his palm. She left because she misunderstood. Marlowe did not answer. Rowan looked at him. The elder had aged since morning. Or perhaps Rowan was only now seeing the exhaustion Clara had hidden from him by solving things before they reached his door. "Speak," Rowan said. Marlowe lifted his eyes. "No, Your Majesty." She left because she understood. The hall went quiet. It should have been treason. It sounded like relief. Rowan stepped toward him. The old instinct rose. Command, punish, make the room smaller until obedience returned. But Clara's voice came back first. "Then I apologize for mistaking usefulness for belonging." His anger faltered. Not vanished. Faltered. That was new. Marlowe continued, carefully now. "The palace has depended on her for years. We all have. You most of all." Rowan's face hardened. "You think I do not know what she did? I think you know today." The words landed with terrible precision. Today, after the wrong tea, after the missing salve, after the empty east wing, after servants had begun saying Lady Clara with a grief they had never dared use in front of him before. Today he knew. Yesterday he had laughed. Or close enough. Rowan looked down at the hairpin in his hand. A small crescent moon. A private chain. He remembered Clara standing in the feast hall, pale and calm, returning it before men who had called her shadow. He remembered her saying she had left everything useful where he could find it. Useful. He had thought the word practical. Now it seemed obscene. "Did she take money?" he asked. Marlowe blinked. "Enough to travel, I believe. Escort. Thomas Vale. Protection?" The elder did not answer. Rowan's wolf stirred beneath his skin, restless and sharp. "She is alone?" "She is free," Marlowe said softly. Rowan looked at him. For one moment, the hall trembled with the danger of that answer. Then Rowan turned away. Because the worst part was that Marlowe was right. Alone sounded like vulnerability. Free sounded like accusation. At the neutral and beyond the old mill, Clara would be sitting somewhere without his banners over her head, without a bell calling her to fix what other people had neglected, without his voice deciding whether her hurt was allowed to matter. He should have felt relief that she was safe. Instead, he felt the first clean edge of fear. Not fear that harm would find her. Fear that peace would. A servant appeared at the doorway, trembling. "Your Majesty, the lower kitchens ask who should approve the winter pantry changes. Lady Clara's notes mention 3 families needing extra grain, but there is no formal authorization." Rowan closed his eyes. 3 families. Of course. Even after leaving, she was feeding people. "Approve them," he said. The servant looked startled. "All 3. All 3. She bowed quickly and left. Marlowe watched him. Rowan hated the pity in the elder's face. Not because it was undeserved. Because it was late. Everything was late now. He picked up the cloak from the chair. It was heavier than he remembered, perhaps because Clara's absence had weight. The silver clasp gleamed where she had repaired what he had broken without telling anyone it had broken. That had been the pattern of them. He broke. She repaired. He ruled. She steadied. He received praise. She stood outside the room. And when she finally placed the broken truth in the middle of his feast, he had called it a scene. Rowan sat slowly in the empty chair beside his own. The one Clara had never been offered. From that place, the hall looked different. Not weaker, more honest. The head of the table no longer seemed commanding from here. It seemed lonely, distant, surrounded by people trained to watch the king's face before speaking the truth. Clara had stood outside and still spoken it. His hand curled around the silver hairpin until pain bloomed in his palm. Good. Pain was at least honest. Marlowe stood near the door, uncertain whether to leave. Rowan's voice came low. "I told her she understood her place." The elder said nothing. She did. The word surprised him. He looked toward the half-open feast hall doors, toward the east corridor beyond them. "She understood all of ours before we did." Silence held. This time, it did not feel like obedience. It felt like mourning. By afternoon, Rowan sent no riders to drag her back. That restraint cost him more than command would have. He sent Thomas Vale's sister a formal notice instead. Clara Whitmore was not to be disturbed by palace representatives unless she requested it. Her expenses would be covered anonymously. If she refused the money, the innkeeper was to donate it to winter stores. It was not forgiveness. It was not repair. It was barely decency. But it was the first order Rowan gave all day that did not ask Clara to carry the consequence. When the notice left, he returned to her East Wing room alone. The list still lay on the desk. Her room key still rested on top of it. He placed the silver hairpin beside the key. Then, after a long hesitation, he placed the repaired cloak over the chair. Not to keep, not to return yet, only because he could not stand seeing either object in the hall where men had laughed. The room remained empty. No scent of tea, no soft footsteps, no quiet voice reminding him what he had forgotten. Rowan sat at her desk and read the list again. Then again, every name, every need, every small crack she had held closed with hands he had called useful. Outside, palace bells rang for evening. No one came running with perfect answers. No one softened the sound. No one made the palace easier to survive. For the first time, Rowan Blackwell did not call for Clara. Not because he did not want to. Because he finally understood that wanting her back and deserving her return were not the same thing. He looked at the key, the hairpin, the cloak, the empty room, and the Alpha King who had once believed his palace stood because of his power learned, too late, that some homes do not collapse when the woman, Clara Whitmore, woke at the neutral end to the sound of rain instead of bells. For a moment, she did not understand the silence. Her body waited for the usual summons. A knock at the East Wing door. A servant whispering about the pantry. A guard asking where Rowan's map seals had been placed. A healer begging for the blue salve key. Nothing came. Only rain against the roof of the old mill inn, soft and uneven, as if the world had decided not to require anything from her yet. Clara opened her eyes. The room was small but clean. A wooden chair stood beside the bed. A basin of water rested near the window. Her travel bag sat on the floor where she had placed it before dawn, still half open because she had been too tired to finish existing properly. No palace crest hung above the door. No Blackwell banners. No silver wolves carved into the bedpost. No reminder that she was near power but not part of it. Just plain walls, warm blankets, and a lock on the inside of the door. That lock made her stare longer than she expected. At Blackwell Palace, doors had always opened because someone needed her. Here, the door would stay closed unless she chose otherwise. Choice felt strange in the morning, almost too large for a woman who had spent years shrinking her wants until they fit between other people's emergencies. Clara sat up slowly. Her body ached from the late walk, the carriage ride, the cold, the night she had not allowed herself to cry. On the chair beside the bed lay the traveling cloak Thomas Vale had given her. For warmth, not obligation. The words returned gently. Not every kindness was a chain. She repeated that once inside her mind, as if teaching a frightened animal a new command. Not every kindness was a chain. A soft knock touched the door. Clara went still. Miss Whitmore, a woman's voice called. It is Eleanor Vale. Breakfast, if you want it. If not, I can leave it outside. If you want it. The phrase nearly undid her. Clara looked at the locked door, then at her hands. They were steady, but not because she felt nothing. Steady because she had survived the worst part of the night and found morning still willing to arrive. You may come in, she said. The door opened just enough for a woman in her 50s to enter with a tray. Eleanor Vale had the same kind eyes as her brother, though hers were sharper around the edges, like someone who had spent a life seeing through excuses. She placed bread, tea, and warm eggs on the table. No bow, no fuss, no staring at Clara's soft, pale face as if trying to measure how broken she was. Thomas said you might need quiet, Eleanor said. He was right. He usually is. Annoying habit. Clara almost smiled. The small movement felt foreign. Eleanor poured tea. It is not palace tea, she said. But it is hot. Clara accepted the cup. The smell was ordinary. Black leaves. Honey. No winter balm. No crushed lavender carefully measured to soothe a king's temper. Just tea. For her. Her throat tightened before she could stop it. Eleanor noticed and looked away with practiced mercy. There is bread with butter. Eat before deciding anything dramatic. I am not dramatic. No woman carrying one bag after midnight believes she is. This time, Clara did smile. Faintly. Enough. Eleanor left soon after, promising nothing and asking no questions. Clara ate half the bread because her body needed proof she had not become a ghost in the night. Then she drank the tea slowly, letting its warmth travel into the places palace discipline had kept cold. Later, she washed, combed her hair, and changed into a simple blue-gray dress Eleanor had left folded at the foot of the bed. It did not fit perfectly. The sleeves were loose. The waist plain. No one had chosen it to make her invisible. That mattered. Near midday, Clara descended to the common room. The inn was quiet. A fire burned low in the hearth. Two travelers spoke near the window. Eleanor wrote accounts behind the counter. Thomas sat near the door, polishing an old lantern that did not need polishing. Everyone looked up when Clara entered. Then, kindly, everyone looked away. The mercy of not being watched felt almost holy. Clara sat near the hearth. For the first hour, she did nothing. That was harder than work. Her mind kept reaching for tasks. The pantry schedule, the healer's cabinet, Rowan's council order, the winter ration families. Every thought rose with urgency, then found no palace waiting to receive it. Her hands tightened in her lap. What was a woman who had been useful when she stopped being used? The question sat beside her like another guest. Eleanor approached with a ledger. I heard from my brother that you are good with records. Clara looked up carefully. Did he say that? He said you could probably run a palace with one hand and insult a councilman with the other if given enough tea. That sounds like Thomas. Eleanor placed the ledger on the table. I am not asking you to work. I am asking whether looking at numbers would make sitting still less painful. Clara stared at the book. The distinction was small. It was also everything. At the palace, work had come as expectation. Here, it arrived as an offer. She opened the ledger. By the third page, she found the problem. You are overpaying for winter grain. Eleanor leaned closer. Am I? Yes. The miller raised the transport fee twice, but did not adjust the weight difference after the bridge repair. Thomas chuckled from the door. 5 minutes. Clara looked down at the page. Numbers. Margins. A problem with an answer. Something inside her loosened. Not because she was needed, because she had chosen to help. For the rest of the afternoon, Clara corrected the grain accounts, marked 2 suspicious supply charges, and reorganized Eleanor's winter storage notes. No one called her little shadow. No one laughed when she knew too much. No one acted as if competence became less valuable because it came from a woman who looked soft. When she finished, Eleanor studied the ledger. You just saved my inn enough coin to feed 3 extra families through frost. Clara's fingers stilled. 3 families. Always, somehow, 3 families. Eleanor looked at her. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. The words were simple, direct, public enough that Thomas heard them, public enough that the travelers heard them. No one laughed. Clara looked at the fire because looking at kindness head-on was still too difficult. You are welcome. Near evening, a rider stopped outside the inn. The common room quieted. Not from fear. From recognition. Blackwell colors. Clara's body knew them before her mind did. Her heart struck once, hard and old. Thomas stood. Eleanor's expression cooled. The rider entered slowly, helmet tucked under one arm, rein dark on his shoulders. Not a warrior sent to drag someone back. A palace courier. Young. Nervous. His eyes found Clara. Miss Whitmore. Not lady. Not shadow. Not property. He held out a sealed notice. From His Majesty. The room seemed to narrow. Clara looked at the black wax. For 3 years, Rowan's messages had meant instruction. Come here. Fix this. Prepare that. Smooth the room. Stand near, not inside. Her hand did not move. Eleanor's voice came gently from behind the counter. You do not have to take it. The courier swallowed. I was told to say that as well. Clara looked at him. What? The young man unfolded a smaller note, clearly memorized, but terrified to speak. His Majesty ordered that you are not to be disturbed unless you wish to receive palace communication. Your expenses here are covered anonymously. If you refuse, the funds are to be given to winter stores. Silence. Clara did not know what she felt. Not forgiveness. Not longing. Not relief exactly. Something quieter. A door she had expected to be pushed against had not been touched. Rowan had sent money, but not command. Careful. Late. Barely decent. Still different from what she had feared. The courier held the sealed notice lower. This contains the official wording, Miss Whitmore. You may burn it if you prefer. I was also told to accept no answer unless you choose to give one. Choose. The word hurt again. Clara reached for the notice. The wax was cold beneath her thumb. Thank you, she said. The courier bowed and left quickly, as though afraid staying longer would turn him into pressure. Clara sat with the sealed notice in her hand. Everyone in the room pretended not to watch. That, too, was kindness. Finally, she broke the wax. The letter was short. Clara, you will not be approached by Blackwell Palace unless you request it. The inn has been instructed to provide whatever you require. If you refuse my assistance, I understand. I will not send riders after you. Rowan. No apology. No explanation. No come home. Her chest tightened. She had expected command. Part of her had prepared to defend herself against it. This was worse in a different way. It was the first proof that Rowan had begun to understand he had no right to pull her back. Understanding was not repair. But it was harder to hate than arrogance. Clara folded the letter carefully. Eleanor watched her. Do you want a reply sent? Clara looked toward the window. Rain blurred the road outside. Somewhere beyond it, Blackwell Palace was learning how to function without her. Rowan was perhaps sitting in her East Wing room, holding a key, a hairpin, a cloak, finally discovering that absence had architecture. She should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she felt tired. No, Clara said. The word came softly, then stronger. No reply. Eleanor nodded. Clara stood and walked to the hearth. For a moment, she held Rowan's letter over the fire. Then she stopped. Not because she wanted to keep it close. Because burning it would make the letter too important. She folded it once more and placed it inside the inn ledger she had corrected, between pages of grain costs and winter stores. Let it become paperwork. Let it become one more record of a transaction that did not own her. That night, Clara returned to her room before moonrise. She locked the door from the inside, then stood in the quiet and listened. No bells. No knocks. No Alpha King calling her name through the east corridor as if her presence were still his to summon. Only rain. Only her own breathing. Only the faint warmth of a day in which she had been useful by choice and thanked without shame. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since leaving, tears came. Not many. Not violently. They slipped down her cheeks in silence. She let them, because there was no one here to turn her pain into a scene. No one to call it emotional. No one to tell her she would calm down by morning. Morning had already come, and she was still gone. That was the truth Blackwell Palace would have to learn next. Not that Clara Whitmore had fled. Not that she had overreacted. Not that she had misunderstood her place. She had understood it perfectly. Then she had chosen another one. Rowan Blackwell did not go to the neutral inn until the 3rd day. That was the first proof that something in him had changed. The old Rowan would have sent riders before sunrise. The old Rowan would have turned concern into command and called it protection. The old Rowan would have entered the inn with Blackwell guards behind him, filled the small rooms with royal pressure, and expected Clara Whitmore to understand that returning was easier than resisting. Instead, he came alone. No crown, no ceremonial cloak, no silver clasp at his throat. Only a dark riding coat, rein on his shoulders, and the crescent hairpin wrapped carefully in a black cloth inside his inner pocket. The inn stood beyond the old mill road, plain and warm beneath a gray afternoon sky. No banners marked it. No wolf crest guarded the door. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin line that seemed too gentle for the storm inside his chest. Rowan stopped his horse before the fence. For one strange moment, he did not dismount. He looked at the inn windows and imagined Clara behind one of them. Not waiting. That word hurt more than he expected. For 3 years, Clara had waited in corridors, near doors, behind council rooms, outside feasts, beside unfinished work, inside promises he had never made brave enough to fulfill. Now, if she was here, she was not waiting for him. The door opened before he moved. Eleanor Vale stepped onto the porch, arms folded, face calm in the way common people became calm when they had already decided rank would not impress them. Your Majesty, Mrs. Vale, you received my brother's note? I did, and still came. Rowan accepted the judgment without correction. I came to ask whether Clara will receive me. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. Ask, she repeated. The word sat between them. Rowan deserved that. Yes. She may say no. I know. The answer cost him nothing to speak and too much to mean. Eleanor studied him for another breath, then turned toward the door. Wait here. Rowan dismounted and stood beside the fence. Reins slid down the back of his neck. His horse shifted once, restless. He did not move toward the porch. He had crossed borders with less hesitation than he felt before that plain wooden step. Inside the inn, Clara sat near the hearth with a ledger open before her. She looked different. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. Her blue-gray dress was simple. Her soft brown hair was loosely braided. Her pale cheeks were warmed by the fire. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, but they no longer seemed like palace shadows. She had slept somewhere that did not call for her every hour. She had eaten food not arranged around his temper. She had sat in a room where no one required her to become invisible before men could feel powerful. Rowan saw all of that before she looked up, and for the first time, he understood that loss did not always announce itself by taking someone far away. Sometimes it was simply seeing them breathe better outside your reach. Eleanor approached her quietly. Miss Whitmore, she said, not lowering her voice enough to hide it from him through the half-open door. The Alpha King is outside. He asks whether you will receive him. Clara's hand stilled on the ledger. Only her hand. Her face remained calm. Rowan felt that calm like a wall. Outside? Clara asked. Yes. Not inside. He is waiting by the fence. A long silence followed. Rowan stood in the rain and learned what waiting felt like when the choice belonged to someone else. At last, Clara closed the ledger. I will speak with him on the porch. Eleanor nodded once. When Clara stepped outside, Rowan's breath changed. He hated that it did. She wore no palace shawl, no Blackwell color, no silver hairpin beneath her collar. Nothing on her body belonged to him, not even by memory. She stopped beneath the porch roof. He remained by the fence until she said, You may come closer. The permission struck deep, not because she gave it coldly, because he needed it. Rowan walked to the bottom of the porch steps and stopped there, lower than her. In the palace, height had always belonged to him. Platforms, thrones, stairways, table heads. Architecture had helped him rule before he opened his mouth. Here, Clara stood above him by one step, and the world did not end. Clara, he said. She looked at him quietly. Your Majesty. The title hurt. It should not have. He had earned it more than any softness. I came to return something. He reached into his coat slowly, careful not to startle her, and unwrapped the black cloth. The silver hairpin lay in his palm. Rainlight caught the crescent edge. Clara's gaze dropped to it. For the first time, pain crossed her face before she could hide it. Small, quick, real. Rowan's hand tightened instinctively. Not to keep it, to keep from begging with it. I should not have given this to you privately, he said. Clara lifted her eyes. The porch went quiet. Inside the inn, no one pretended not to listen. Thomas sat near the window. Eleanor remained behind the counter. A few travelers lowered their cups. Good. Let there be witnesses. For once, let the truth not be hidden. I gave you a symbol, Rowan continued, voice low but clear, without giving you a place. I let it become something you had to carry in secret. Clara did not answer. Her stillness demanded accuracy. He forced himself toward it. That was not kindness. It was cowardice. The word came rough. His pride resisted it. He said it anyway. Rain struck the porch roof in slow, hard drops. Clara looked at the hairpin again. Why are you returning it? Because it is yours. No, she said softly. The refusal did not surprise him. It still hurt. It belonged to the girl who believed you, Clara said. Rowan went still. She wore it because she thought private tenderness meant public courage would come later. She was wrong. The sentence opened something in him that anger had spent years guarding. She was not wrong to believe me, he said. Clara's eyes sharpened. Rowan lowered his head once. No, that is not what I meant. He took a breath. She was wrong because I made belief unsafe. Silence. That silence was not forgiveness, but it allowed truth to remain in the room. Clara's expression changed only slightly. Why are you here, Rowan? His name. Not title. Not softness. Something sharper. He almost answered badly. Because the palace is failing. Because I need you. Because I cannot sleep in rooms you emptied. Because every cup of tea tastes like proof that I did not know the woman who kept me alive. All of those were true. All of them were selfish first. So he chose the truth that asked least from her. To apologize where they can hear me. Clara's eyes moved to the inn behind her. Then back to him. The palace could not hear you? It will. She held his gaze. Then speak. Rowan looked toward the open doorway. At Eleanor. At Thomas. At the common room where Clara had been allowed to sit as herself. Then he looked back at the woman on the porch. I humiliated you, he said. No title. No excuse. I allowed men to laugh at you, because correcting them would have required me to name what you were before I had the courage to deserve it. I called you useful because I wanted the benefit of your loyalty without the vulnerability of honoring it. Clara's face remained still, but her hand moved once against the side of her dress. He saw the tremor. It punished him more than tears would have. I said you understood your place, Rowan continued. You did. Better than I did. You understood the palace, the servants, the wounds, the hunger, the tempers, the laws, the places where power was cruel because no one important was watching. His voice roughened. I made your place outside the room because inside it, people might have seen how much I depended on you. Rain fell harder. No one interrupted. Not even the inn. I am sorry, Rowan said. The words sounded too small. They were. I am sorry for making you carry private promises in public silence. I am sorry for letting them call your devotion manageable. I am sorry I reached for your work for 3 years and called it order when it was love I had not earned. Clara looked away, only for a second, toward the wet road, toward anywhere he was not standing with late regret in his hands. When she looked back, her eyes were bright. Not crying. Close. I love that palace, she said. I know. No, Clara replied. You know now? He closed his mouth. She stepped down one porch step. Now they stood level. The movement nearly broke him because it was not return. Only fairness. I love the healing wing, she said. The lower kitchen. The guards who pretended not to need broth after patrol. The Omegas who whispered because no one else listened. I love the winter gardens, even when the gate stuck. I love the east corridor because I thought standing near the door meant one day it would open. Her voice stayed soft. That made it unbearable. And I loved you. Rowan did not move. He had wanted those words once, perhaps, in some hidden, cowardly part of himself. He had imagined them as reward. Now they arrived as evidence. I know, he said. Clara shook her head. No. You know now. Again. The correction landed where it belonged. Rowan lowered his gaze. Yes. The hairpin still lay in his palm. He held it out again, not toward her hand, but toward the porch railing, giving her space to decide whether it came closer. Clara looked at it for a long time. Then she took the black cloth from him, not the hairpin. She folded the cloth over the silver crescent while it remained in his palm. Keep it, she said. His eyes lifted. Clara, not as hope. The word stopped him. Keep it as memory. Of what happens when you give a woman symbols instead of respect. The hairpin felt suddenly heavier than any crown. Rowan closed his fingers around it. I will. I do not know if that makes me cruel, she said. It does not. You wanted me to take it back. Yes. Because then you could believe something was restored. He could not deny it. Her understanding had always been merciless when she stopped using it to protect him. Yes, he said. Clara nodded faintly. At least you are beginning to answer correctly. Something like pain and gratitude moved through him at once. It was not enough. He knew that now. The knowledge did not lessen his want. It only made his want less important than it used to be. I will not ask you to return today, he said. Clara looked at him. Today. He swallowed. I will try not to ask at all. That was more honest. Her face softened by a fraction. Not for him, perhaps. For the effort of a man finally wrestling pride without making her hold the weapon. Good. The word echoed between them. Once, he had given her that word like payment. Now she returned it like a measured verdict. Rowan almost smiled at the cruelty of balance. He deserved that too. Inside the inn, Eleanor cleared her throat. Miss Whitmore, your tea is getting cold. Clara looked back. A life was waiting for her inside. Small, temporary, uncertain, but hers. Rowan saw the difference. At the palace, rooms waited to use her. Here, a cup of tea waited because someone had made it for her. Clara turned to him again. Tell the palace the pantry authorization for the 3 families should be permanent, not seasonal. Rowan's chest tightened. Even now, even after everything, she was still thinking of them. I already approved it. She blinked. That surprised her. Good. Let him become someone who could surprise her without hurting her. All 3, she asked. All 3. A faint breath left her. Not relief exactly. Something gentler. Good. There was the word again. This time, it did not starve. Rowan stepped back from the porch. I will go. Clara nodded. He mounted his horse slowly. At the road, he looked back once. She stood under the porch roof, blue-gray dress soft in the rain light, hair loosely braided, face calm and wounded and no longer turned toward him for permission to matter. He had never seen her more clearly, and because he finally saw her, he knew he could not call her home. Not while home still meant the place where she had been taught to disappear. Rowan touched the wrapped hairpin inside his coat. Then he rode away. No command behind him. No promise demanded. No forgiveness received. Only the sound of rain. The weight of a symbol returned as memory, and the unbearable knowledge that the woman he had humiliated had not stopped low. The palace heard Rowan Blackwell apologize before Clara Whitmore ever returned to see whether it had changed. That was important. For 3 days after he left the neutral inn, Rowan did not summon her, did not send letters, did not dress regret in royal urgency and call it concern. Instead, he opened the council chamber doors. All of them. The elders arrived expecting border disputes, pantry authorizations, winter patrol reports, and the continued quiet disaster of a palace learning to function without the woman it had never seated. They found the servants there too. The healers. The kitchen stewards. 2 Omega representatives who had never before been allowed past the outer benches. Captain Hale stood near the wall with several guards who looked uncomfortable in a room where truth, not rank, had been given priority. At the head of the table, Rowan stood without his crown ring. The empty chair beside him remained empty. But this time, it had not been ignored. On it lay Clara's room key, the folded list she had left behind, and the repaired black cloak. Not hidden in the east wing. Not locked away with shame. Placed where everyone could see what had been returned. Elder Marlowe's face tightened when he entered. Your Majesty, he said carefully. Is this a formal council? Yes. Rowan's voice carried through the chamber. And not only for those who were comfortable speaking when Clara Whitmore was absent. Silence fell quickly. Not obedient silence. The frightened kind. The kind people used when a powerful man finally turned his gaze toward a wound everyone had helped keep open. Rowan looked at the servants first. That alone changed the room. I called Clara useful, he said. A soft sound moved through the benches. The young maid from the feast hall lowered her eyes. Rowan continued. I allowed allied alphas to mock her. I allowed the council to benefit from her work while denying her place. I allowed this palace to run on her care and then treated that care as convenience. No one spoke. No one corrected him. Good. He did not deserve softening. He looked toward the elder who had once asked if Clara understood her place. You laughed. The elder paled. Your Majesty, the wine did not laugh. The sentence cut through the chamber. The elder closed his mouth. Rowan's hand rested on the back of the empty chair. For a moment, He felt the old instinct rise. Keep control. Make the confession clean enough not to weaken him. But clean confessions were often another kind of lie. So he let the ugliness remain. I humiliated a woman who had been holding this palace together for 3 years, he said. Not because I did not know she mattered. Because I did not want anyone to see how much she mattered to me. There it was. The part pride hated most. The part power could not defend. Across the chamber, the healer covered her mouth. Captain Hale looked down. One of the Omega women began crying silently. Rowan did not look away from them. I mistook dependence for authority, he said. I mistook silence for consent. I mistook her loyalty for something I had earned simply because she kept giving it. The words cost him. Not enough. Never enough. But something. From this day forward, Clara Whitmore's work will be entered into the palace record. Marlowe lifted his head. Rowan continued before objection could form. The winter ration protections she designed become permanent law. The healing wing supply system she created remains under healer authority, not council convenience. Omega petitions will be heard monthly, with representation present. The East Garden Gate will be repaired before nightfall. A ripple passed through the room at that last one. Small. Almost absurd. But not. Sometimes respect began where neglect had been practical. And the chair? Elder Marlowe asked quietly. Rowan looked at the empty seat beside him. The room waited. Once, he might have said it would remain available for political use. Once, he might have said nothing. Now he understood that silence had built too many cages. It will remain empty until someone earns the right to sit there by protecting the people she protected, he said. Not by birth. Not by flattery. Not by making order look beautiful while others bleed in the corridors. The council absorbed that. Uncomfortably. Good. Comfort had made them cowards. When the meeting ended, no one left quickly. Servants stood as if unsure whether the room had truly allowed them to exist. The Omega women spoke quietly with the healer. Captain Hale ordered the East Gate repaired himself. Elder Marlowe remained near the table, looking at the cloak on the chair. Rowan touched nothing. Those things were not relics. They were witnesses. By evening, news traveled faster than command. Through the kitchens, through the healing wing, through the guard barracks, through the lower corridors where Clara's name had always been spoken softly, then swallowed when footsteps approached. This time, no one swallowed it. Lady Clara. Miss Whitmore. Clara. The woman who made the blue salve records. The woman who kept Miles's fever down. The woman who knew the pantry families by name. The woman His Majesty wronged. That last part mattered. Not because it healed her. Because truth finally had a place inside the palace larger than rumor. At the Neutral Inn, Eleanor Vale heard it first from a grain trader who arrived near dusk, soaked from rain and eager for warmth. They say Blackwell admitted it before the council, he said over stew. Named the insult himself. Put her key on the chair beside him. Clara was mending a torn ledger binding near the hearth. Her hand stopped, only for a breath. Eleanor looked at her, but said nothing. The trader continued, unaware of the woman sitting 3 tables away. Permanent ration protections, too. The Omega petitions. Even the East Garden Gate. Captain Hale had men on it before sunset. Thomas, seated near the window, glanced at Clara. She kept her eyes on the thread. It took effort. More than she wanted anyone to know. The East Garden Gate. Of all things, that nearly broke her. Not the apology. Not the record. The gate. The small, neglected lock she had warmed with her breath before leaving. The thing no one repaired because she had always known the trick. Someone had finally looked at it after she stopped opening it for them. Eleanor approached quietly after the trader went upstairs. Do you want to hear the rest? Clara tied off the thread. I heard enough. Enough good or enough painful? Clara looked toward the fire. Yes. Eleanor accepted that answer. Later, alone in her room, Clara sat beside the window and watched rain trace the glass. The palace had spoken. Rowan had spoken. He had named the wound publicly, where he had once hidden affection privately and allowed humiliation publicly. That mattered. She wished it did not. She wished she could dismiss it completely, burn it the way she might have burned a letter that asked too much too late. But healing was not helped by lying to herself. It mattered, and still, it did not call her back. Both truths sat together inside her, uncomfortable but possible. The next morning, a formal document arrived at the inn. Not a letter from Rowan. A record copy. Eleanor brought it to Clara with breakfast and set it on the table without comment. Clara opened it after the tea cooled. Her name appeared near the top. Clara Whitmore, recognized contributor to Blackwell Palace Welfare, author of Winter Ration Reform, Healing Wing Supply Order, and Lower Household Protections. She read the line twice. Then a third time. Contributor. Not shadow. Not useful woman. Not companion of uncertain rank. A name attached to work. A public record where private labor had been hidden. Her throat tightened. She hated that it still touched her. No. She corrected herself. She did not hate it. She hated that it had taken leaving to receive it. There was a difference. At the bottom of the record, beneath the council seal, Rowan had written one sentence by hand. This should have been true before she had to walk away. Clara stared at the words for a long time. Then she folded the document and placed it in her bag. Not in the hearth. Not in the ledger. Her bag. Some acknowledgments did not restore a home, but they could travel with a woman rebuilding one. Days passed. Then a week. Clara stayed at the inn. Not because she was hiding, because she was learning the difference between stillness and being trapped. She helped Eleanor with accounts when she wanted to. She sorted winter grain records. She taught Thomas how to label medicine jars clearly enough that no frightened boy would be left waiting for the one person who knew the difference. Word came that Blackwell Palace no longer sent for her. That hurt too. Strangely. Not because she wanted to be summoned. Because part of her had expected to spend healing resisting the pull. Instead, Rowan gave her distance. Late respect. Thin, imperfect, but real. It left her alone with herself. That was harder. On the 8th morning, Thomas asked if she wanted to walk to the old mill. No reason, he said, which meant he had won. Clara went because the weather was clear for the first time in days. The road curved past bare trees and frost-browned grass. The old mill stood beside a slow river, its wheel still, its stones dark with age. A woman waited there. Clara stopped. Her mother, Evelyn Whitmore, stood beside the bridge, wrapped in a dark wool cloak, hands clasped around a traveling purse. Her face was older than Clara remembered from their last visit. Softer too. Or perhaps Clara was simply no longer looking at mothers through palace exhaustion. Clara, Evelyn said. One word. It carried no command. Clara walked into her mother's arms before pride could decide whether it was ready. For a while, neither woman spoke. Thomas waited by the road, politely facing away. Evelyn held her daughter carefully, as if she could feel every invisible bruise without needing to ask where they were. I heard, she whispered. Clara closed her eyes. Everyone heard. Good. That made Clara pull back. Her mother's eyes were wet, but steady. Good, Evelyn repeated. Let them hear what silence cost you. Something inside Clara trembled. She had expected comfort. She had not expected permission to be angry. Evelyn touched her cheek. You always try to make love look graceful, even when it was hurting you. Clara looked down. I thought patience was loyalty. Sometimes, her mother said. Sometimes it is fear wearing better manners. The words landed gently. That made them more dangerous. Clara looked toward the river. The water moved slowly beneath the bridge, carrying pale leaves away from the mill. Rowan apologized, she said. I heard that too. He changed things. Yes. Clara's voice dropped. That does not make me want to go back. Her mother took her hand. Then do not punish yourself for healing correctly. Clara looked at her. Evelyn smiled sadly. Daughter, a man can become better and still be too late for the woman he hurt. The river moved. The air held still. Clara breathed in. For the first time, those two truths did not fight each other. Rowan could regret. The palace could change. Her name could be written into law. And Clara Whitmore could still choose a life beyond the walls that had only honored her after losing the right to use her. She looked back toward the inroad. Not glamorous. Not royal. Not guaranteed. But open. Her mother squeezed her hand. Where will you go? Clara thought of the ledger in her room. Eleanor's accounts. Thomas's lantern. The Winter families. The document in her bag. The silence that no longer frightened her every morning. Then she thought of the palace. Less like home now. More like a chapter finally named properly. I do not know yet, Clara said. The answer should have sounded lost. It did not. It sounded spacious. Evelyn nodded. Then begin there. That evening, Clara returned to the inn with her mother walking beside her. At the doorway, she paused and looked toward the distant road leading back to Blackwell Palace. No bells reached her. No riders came. No Alpha King stood waiting with a command shaped like concern. Only dusk. Only wind. Only the life she had not yet chosen fully, but no longer needed permission to imagine. Inside her bag, the palace record rested beside her own coins and letters. Proof that she had mattered there. Proof that she did not have to remain there to keep mattering. Clara stepped inside. The door closed behind her by her own hand. And somewhere far away, in a palace finally learning to say her name with honor, Rowan Blackwell sat beside an empty chair and learned that public regret could correct a record, repair a gate, and protect a few lives. But it could not turn a place that humiliated her into home again. Clara Whitmore did not return to Blackwell Palace as the woman who had left it. That was the ending Rowan Blackwell had to learn slowly. Not in one dramatic moment. Not through a final confrontation beneath chandeliers. Not through Clara standing before him and declaring herself healed, because healing was rarely generous enough to arrive in speeches. He learned it through absence. Through mornings when the tea was made correctly by someone Clara had trained from miles away through old notes. Through council meetings where Omega representatives now sat in the outer row and spoke with trembling voices that grew steadier each month. Through winter ration ledgers bearing her name in the margin because no one dared erase it anymore. Through the East Garden gate opening smoothly every time frost touched the hinges. That gate became Rowan's punishment in the strangest way. It worked now. Perfectly. Every quiet click reminded him that the palace had been capable of repair long before she walked out. It simply had not cared until her absence made neglect visible. Clara learned this from letters she did not request. Not from Rowan. From her mother. From Eleanor. From a healer named, and who sent updates wrapped in practical gratitude. Miles is walking without pain. The lower kitchen has 2 new apprentices. The pantry families survived the frost. Your blue salve order saved more lives than the council admitted. Clara kept those letters in a wooden box at the neutral end. Not hidden. Not worshipped. Kept. Some things deserved record without becoming chains. Spring came carefully. The old mill river thawed first, dark water breaking beneath sheets of ice. Then the road softened. Then merchants began traveling again, bringing cloth, grain, news, and questions. By then, Clara no longer stayed at Eleanor Vale's Inn as a woman recovering from a palace. She stayed as someone useful by choice. That difference changed the shape of every day. She helped Eleanor expand the winter accounts into a relief network for travelers, retired servants, widowed Omegas, and injured patrolmen who belonged to packs too proud to admit they had left people hungry. Thomas carried supplies along the old roads. Clara wrote letters to healers, millers, and small village leaders. Her mother remained for 3 weeks, then returned home only after making Clara promise to visit by summer. No one called Clara Queen. No one called her Luna. No one placed her beside a throne and asked whether she felt grateful. And still people came. At first, 1 healer from a neighboring pack. Then 2 stewards. Then a young Omega mother with a sick child. Then a guard captain who had heard Miss Whitmore knew how to make ration systems fair without humiliating the families receiving help. Miss Whitmore. Her name traveled differently now. Not as shadow. Not as palace gossip. As answer. One afternoon, Eleanor watched Clara mark supply routes across a map and said, "You know you have accidentally built an office in my common room." Clara looked around. There were ledgers on 3 tables, medicine jars near the window, winter petition forms stacked beside the hearth, and Thomas asleep in a chair with a half-written delivery schedule on his knee. Clara blinked. Then she laughed. A real laugh. Small but whole. "I suppose I have." Eleanor leaned against the counter. "There is an empty building beside the old mill. Roof leaks. Windows are stubborn. Door lock sticks in rain." Clara lifted an eyebrow. "That sounds familiar." "Yes," Eleanor said dryly. "I thought you might enjoy bullying another building into usefulness." 2 months later, the old mill office opened without ceremony. Clara insisted on that. No ribbons. No speeches. No powerful men blessing work they had not done. Only a painted wooden sign above the repaired door, Whitmore Relief House. Below it, in smaller letters, records, medicine, winter aid, neutral petitions. The first person through the door was Miles. He arrived with Captain Hale, taller now, still slightly awkward, carrying a crate of blue salve jars labeled in careful handwriting. "Miss Whitmore," he said, face flushed with nerves. "The palace sent these. Approved by the healer. Not the council." Clara accepted the crate. "Good. Miles smiled at the word like it meant something. Perhaps it did. Captain Hale stood outside the threshold, helmet under one arm. His Majesty asked that I deliver a message only if you wanted to hear it. Clara paused. The room quieted, not with fear, but respect for her choice. She looked at Hale. Is it an order? No. An apology? No. Then say it. Hale lowered his eyes briefly. He said the chair beside him remains empty. Not for waiting. For remembering. Clara felt the words enter. They hurt. Not sharply. More like touching an old scar and discovering it was still part of the body. She placed the salve crate on the table. Tell him memory is only useful if it changes what comes next. Hale nodded. I think he knows that now. Clara did not answer. Knowing now was not the same as knowing then. But it was not nothing. That evening, after everyone left, Clara stood outside Whitmore Relief House and watched the sunset turn the river copper. The building was not beautiful. The left window stuck. The roof still needed work. The door frame leaned slightly, as if the whole place had survived by stubbornness instead of elegance. Clara loved it immediately, not the way she had loved Blackwell Palace. That love had asked her to disappear into usefulness until she mistook being needed for being held. This love felt different, rougher, more honest. A place could need repair without demanding she become invisible to deserve staying. Summer came, then autumn. Whitmore Relief House grew, not grandly, steadily. Clara hired 2 widowed Omegas as record keepers. She trained a former kitchen boy to manage grain weights. She taught Miles how to read injury codes properly, though he still mislabeled Moonroot twice and blamed the ink. Every mistake was corrected without humiliation. That became Clara's quiet law. No one would learn under her by being made small. News of Blackwell Palace came sometimes. Rowan had not taken a queen. The chair stayed empty. The council changed slowly, reluctantly, under pressure that no longer sounded like Clara's whispers, but Rowan's public orders. He became, people said, fairer, colder in some ways, quieter, less easily flattered, more likely to ask who prepared the report before accepting praise for it. When Clara first heard that, she sat alone for a while, not grieving, not hoping, only letting the strange ache pass. A man becoming better after losing you did not mean you were meant to return. Sometimes it meant your leaving had finally done what your love could not. On the first winter anniversary of the feast, Rowan came to Whitmore Relief House. Not alone this time. Not with guards either. He came with a wagon of grain, 3 healers, and a council document granting neutral protection to every traveler treated under Clara's roof. He stopped outside the door and waited. People inside looked toward Clara. She was at the front table, writing winter assignments. Her hair was pinned back. Her blue dress was practical, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Ink marked one finger. Flour dust from the kitchen clung to her skirt. Her cheeks were warm from the hearth. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood in the east corridor with a tray of emergency documents hidden beneath cloth. Or perhaps she looked exactly like her, only no longer hidden. Clara walked to the door. Rowan stood in the snow. He wore a plain black coat. No crown ring. No ceremonial clasp. The crescent hairpin was not visible, but somehow she knew he had kept it. Miss Whitmore, he said. Not Clara. Not because he had lost the right to say her name forever. Because he understood that softness required invitation. Your Majesty. The title no longer hurt. That surprised her. It had become distance. Nothing more. Rowan gestured to the wagon. Winter stores. No conditions. Clara looked past him. The sacks were marked for lower households, not palace kitchens. The healers waited respectfully. The council document was sealed, but the ribbon around it was plain. No theatrical royal black wax. You could have sent it, she said. Yes. Why come? Rowan looked at the building behind her. At the women working over ledgers. At Miles carrying jars. At Thomas arguing with a miller near the gate. At Eleanor standing by the hearth, watching like a woman prepared to throw a king out if needed. Then his eyes returned to Clara. Because I spent years letting other people receive the work of your hands while I accepted the honor of it, he said. I wanted to bring this myself and leave with none of the credit. Clara studied him. The old Rowan would have made that sentence sound noble. This one sounded tired. Honest. Still late. Thank you, she said. His breath shifted. Not hope. Recognition that thanks was all he would receive. You are welcome. Snow fell between them. Soft. Careful. For a moment, memory stood there too. The winter cloak. The east corridor. The empty chair. The hairpin. The promise. One day, this palace will know what you are to me. The palace did know now. The world did, in its own way. But Clara no longer needed the palace to name her. That was the difference. Rowan reached into his coat. Slowly, he removed a folded paper. Not sealed. Open. I wrote something, he said. You do not have to take it. Clara looked at the paper. Read it. His eyes lifted, startled. She stepped aside slightly so the doorway, the workers, the snow, and the relief house all remained witnesses. No more private symbols. Rowan understood. He unfolded the page. His voice was low but clear. Clara Whitmore held Blackwell Palace together when I mistook silence for loyalty and loyalty for something I had earned. She protected people I had overlooked, corrected laws I had allowed to harden, and gave dignity to rooms where rank had replaced kindness. I humiliated her before men who should have been corrected by me. She left with more honor than I showed in keeping her. This aid is given under her standards, not mine. The snow seemed to quiet. Inside the doorway, no one moved. Clara listened to every word. Not as a woman starving for apology. As a woman receiving a debt named in public, finally, where it belonged. When Rowan finished, he folded the paper. His hand lowered. Clara's throat felt tight. She let it. Leave the document with Eleanor, she said. He nodded. And the grain. Thomas will inspect the weight. A faint curve touched Rowan's mouth. Of course. For 1 second, they almost smiled at the same memory. Then it passed. Not painfully. Naturally. Rowan looked at her once more. Are you happy? The question was dangerous only because it sounded simple. Clara looked behind her. At the crooked shelves. The noisy hearth. The ledger-stained tables. The people who called for her because they respected what she could give, not because they owned her answers. Then she looked back at him. I am becoming honest, she said. Rowan absorbed that. It seemed to hurt him less than happiness would have. Or perhaps more. I am glad, he said. She believed him. That did not change the ending. He stepped back from the threshold. Not dismissed. Released. There was grace in that too, though not the kind that repaired what had been broken. The wagon was unloaded. The healers entered. Eleanor took the document without bowing. Thomas inspected the grain with theatrical suspicion until Miles laughed aloud. Rowan watched from the road for a while. Then he mounted his horse. Before leaving, he looked once toward Clara. She stood in the doorway of Whitmore Relief House, not under palace banners, not beside his throne, not waiting in a corridor with work hidden beneath cloth. She stood beneath her own sign, her own name, her own chosen roof. Rowan lowered his head. Not deeply. Enough. Clara inclined hers in return. Not forgiveness. Not invitation. Acknowledgement. Then the Alpha King rode back toward the palace that had learned her name too late. Clara remained where she was. Snow touched her hair. Behind her, Eleanor called. Miss Whitmore, the miller is lying about sack weight again. Thomas shouted. I am not old enough to be insulted this early. Miles dropped something glass and yelled. It was empty. The room erupted into noise. Need. Warmth. Chaos. Life. Clara turned back inside, smiling before she could stop herself. This time, when people called her name, she answered because she chose to. Not because fear trained her. Not because love begged for scraps of recognition. Not because a palace needed her invisible. She answered from a doorway she could close, a room where her chair was not symbolic, but used, a life where gratitude was spoken before absence taught it manners. And far behind her, Blackwell Palace kept its empty chair. Not as a promise she would return, as proof that some women do not leave because they misunderstand their place. They leave because, at last, they understand their worth. Clara Whitmore stepped into the warm noise of wit.